New enhancements as well as the
Oh,
options
okay.
for establishing an assessment district, special districts, joint power authority.
Those are all what you might call revenue enhancements. There would be other ways to pay for services.
Okay, I thought it was a way to acquire more revenue.
Well, it depends on how you view it. Right now, we are very dependent upon the sales tax, TOT, and property tax in the general fund. That is probably not really sustainable for us. We need to look at, are there other mechanisms? It doesn't necessarily mean more. It might mean that there are other better ways to pay for some of the services that we're now paying
I
for.
totally get that that's one thing, but because he said revenue enhancements, I wondered if he had ideas of how he was going to bring more revenue in, not just offset expenses that we had.
He might well look and make some suggestions for us that other communities are using, right? Mm-hmm.
I'd move the recommended action.
Second.
I'll second it. Sir?
Yes, excuse me, I sort of just assumed that you would start talking.
Oh, didn't think I should. In terms of the deliverables, it says in the memorandum, first page, second paragraph, center, first line, develop a revenue forecasting model. Do we wind up with that model that we can manipulate in the future years? Is that part of the deliverable?
Yes, I think basically it'll be a form of a spreadsheet that then we could either, enter into our own system and duplicate. But definitely it's something that I think we don't have to go out and pay for this again. We can use the basis that he provides these numbers on and use it ourselves in the future.
The key there is the basis in addition to the spreadsheet itself, so that we have a clear understanding of the inputs.
Yeah, they're not, he's just going to go out and do, any one of us could do this if we had time and energy right now. You go to the sources of where our revenues are, and you track those. And that's what he's basically going to build a spreadsheet to do.
Thank you.
I want to follow up on Councilmember Roden's questions. Property, sales, bed tax, and fees. Certainly when you talk to this person, he must have said, well, other jurisdictions have come up with these alternative sources of revenue. It's hard for, I can't grasp what alternatives he or she or this organization would come up with. Because I know you've mentioned to me that other jurisdictions rely more heavily on the property tax. We rely very heavily on the sales tax. But basically, I don't know what magical revenue enhancements that this $21,000 might buy us. And secondly, I would have sworn we saw a forecast before you came on board, a major forecast in PowerPoint form when we were talking about Measure S, I believe it was. And I remember you were significantly pointing out as we watched all the charts about revenue forecasting that we were going to bottom out, we were going to not make it in this year. Do you recollect seeing that forecasting that we've already seen? Maybe Director Elton remembers a major financial presentation on forecasting over the next 10 or 15 years.
After he speaks, I'll answer your question about the revenue.
I think what you're remembering was during the water and sewer rate information, because I don't remember being here when there was any revenue forecastings of that magnitude that were done, and that occurred during a time I was not here.
Yeah,
It's hard to determine, but I believe it had to do with general fund revenues in relation to trying to pass Measure S, and that even with Measure S, it was going to be insufficient in the long haul. And
it was
so
Mike did it.
I opined it was going to probably be 0.75% instead of 0.5% to do what we thought we needed to do.
Right, and so, I'm dubious here.
I don't have that readily available if something was done. You think it was done while you weren't
I
here?
was also not here when Measure S finally passed. I was here for the ones that didn't pass. But, so if it was done during the final Measure S, I don't have any remnants of that left to build off of.
Yeah, it may well have been done. I would imagine that there would have had been some addressing of it, but it's not something that we're able right now to tap into primarily, we just need to have this information available like yesterday, if we could have it, to help us do any future planning. So that's the real purpose of it. As far as the revenue enhancements, we're looking at perhaps alternate means of gaining revenue for perhaps different services that are now being covered in the general fund, that we might do through assessment districts or through special district or through some joint powers. So it isn't so much that there's a particular revenue out there that then we would initiate a new tax. We might actually look at structuring ourselves a little differently and raising money a little differently. So it isn't all dependent on the general fund. That's the purpose of getting this money, that second part of the study done.
I think I understand. I'm not sure what we're going to really get in the end that we don't already know. The forecasting is negative. I mean, we know we're in trouble. We know we have to do something. In terms of assessment districts, the only way that serves our budget, in my opinion, is we have to beg people who aren't currently citizens of the city of Ukiah to join an assessment district when we may not have, even though this person comes and says you need an assessment district for recreation, we will have no control over the creation of that assessment district if it's dependent on the 15,000 people that live outside our city boundaries.
Well, I don't know that they're going to come and say we should or shouldn't do something. They're going to compile the numbers so that we can talk from a point of data and facts, if indeed it looks like something that we could do to offset expenditures out of the general fund. I mean, that's the point of it, is just to have the data.
So these people can prognosticate the future of the economy, though? I mean, isn't that what they have to do?
No, they can count the number of parcels that would be in a certain district or could go into a formation of one and count the revenue that could come from there from a certain tax and tell us if it makes any sense to look at funding some of our services a little differently.
Okay. Further discussion. I want some council members to convince me that in a budget crisis, the spending of $21,000 for a sort of an economic forecast, when it's hard to predict what the capitalist economy is going to do in a year and a half, and the idea that we would want to fund our recreation services from a valley-wide recreation assessment district, they may say that's the way you've got to go. The problem is we probably couldn't get the votes for such a district from the 15,000 people that live outside our boundaries. So the question is, we get all these recommendations, what control will we have over the creation of those districts that are beyond our current boundaries?
Why do you ask us to do the impossible? To convince you?
Well, the question is, will I vote yes just to go along and create consensus?
I'd like
trying
to
to
point
decide
out,
right now.
I'd like to point out some differences between, for instance, the way our fire department is funded and the district fire department is funded. They have parcel taxes, which those people voted. Ours is borne virtually fully by our